Really excited to have these three experts with us today. As we go through the conversation, feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll address them as we go. And if we don't have a chance to address them live here in the conversation, we will follow up with you by email afterwards and answer your question as well. Also, a quick plug here, if you like the conversation today, keep an eye out because we'll be having further deep dives on sustainability, and especially around the ESG reporting kind of topic, and then also for consumers and commerce and how they're driving different behaviors around sustainability in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for those if you enjoyed the conversation today. Without further delay, Deborah, take it away.
Thanks, Matt. You laid out some of my favorite topics, including supply chain and sustainability, and really kind of how the two reinforce each other. You know, I think we have a great agenda for today with kind of, if you will, 4 key pillars around, visibility, trust, orchestration, and optimization. And, if we kick it off with visibility, as someone who sits on many audit committees, and as we're thinking about 2023, there are a lot of, I think right now, Jessica, this is where I can only imagine how busy you are, because right now I would say many of us have more questions than we have answers. So as we kind of move through this, kind of intermediate or kind of intervening period before, much of this is kind of put into play or into effect, from a reporting perspective, how are you seeing companies actually kind of get their arms around, the visibility needed to really prepare for these upcoming changes as it relates to, kind of things from a, if you will, regulation perspective, but also even just kind of how companies disclose what they're doing and measuring that. Jessica, if you could kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Deborah. So, regardless of whether we're starting on a focused ESG reporting conversation or a sustainable supply chain conversation, like you said, it truly gets back to that data piece. So it always comes back to data. We are always chanting data, data, data. And that's coming from internal, but especially when it comes to supply chain, it's across your value chain as well. And I think that's why when we think about the complexities of the supply chain, and on the flip side, why data in the supply chain is so critical to have visibility into, it's really because you need to be capturing it across the entire value chain, upstream and downstream. You might have insight into some suppliers, but if you don't know what logistics firm is maybe bringing those ingredients or materials somewhere, then it immediately starts to kind of limit true visibility. So I would say data, it starts there. We certainly help clients really figure out what the right data strategy is to align to, like you said, the reporting regulations and frameworks that continue to come out, as well as what targets and goals our clients have set. So I would just say across the value chain, very important. And then secondly, really aligning between, what do you need to report out on from a compliance perspective, and how can you also align that to the goals and the KPIs and, again, the targets that you've set out externally.
And if I can ask a follow-up question to that, how are you finding that organizations are getting kind of, who in the organization is owning this? Mm-hmm. And then how are they building? Do they need a team or do they just call you for questions? But how are they actually kind of making sure that they are kind of doing what they need to do, and that they're also kind of in line with how other, kind of retailers and companies are approaching this?
Absolutely. A lot of times our initial conversations might focus and start with the procurement side of things, the supplier side of things. But very quickly, we want to prepare for that second conversation to involve the procurement team, maybe someone from finance and the compliance side of things, someone from the really representing the business side, and then of course IT. So we know that really across any transformation, engagement, or project or initiative, you always need business and IT. This is absolutely no different, and if anything, even more critical. You need to know where the data is coming from, and so having that representation of not only your procurement and supply chain professionals and leadership, but also that finance regulatory side, folks who need to pull that into your sustainability reporting. You need to have all of those folks in the room.
Very helpful. Baan, I'm not sure if you know, but actually my introduction to blockchain was almost a decade ago with IBM. So I was Hong Kong based. They, kind of helped support a lab that we were in, but really this whole idea around kind of blockchain and, I used to call it kind of, cotton field to consumer and everything along, that, the chain. But really IBM, to me and everything around food trust, IBM has kind of been the cornerstone. As you think about, the retailers and brands and companies that you kind of support and work with, how has their knowledge in this area continued to evolve? And where would you say are the greatest opportunities, as we think about visibility and moving forward, where is the greatest opportunity for education at this point?
Right. I mean, some of the things that we've seen in the past couple of years with putting, your supply chain information, and just like you said, from farm to fork, a lot of the ability to see, the entire supply chain has been very eye-opening to a lot of the retailers that we work with, and it's not just the retailers, right? Having that visibility, we've also seen can correlate to really boosting some of the retailers' merchandising or even engaging with consumers and potentially leading to increasing sales. And so, we've definitely seen a correlation with that if you can scan a product and you can see the entire supply chain or where it's coming from, has, allowed retailers to see a return on that investment. Where we need to continue to educate people is, why is it important to get the data into the system, right? Goes back to what Jessica was saying. It's all about the data, the quality of the data. You can feed, data into a system, but it's all about making sure you have the right quality of the data, the right information, the right suppliers connected to each other, and ensuring that when you do need that information, it's quickly and readily available to you, right? So putting it in a platform or solution that allows you to easily get to it, whether you're at the beginning of the supply chain or the end of the supply chain, having that visibility, no matter where you are, really starts to become critical in optimizing your supply chain as well.
You helped me think about a kind of case study that we had worked on with the MIT Media Lab around, kind of at the factory level and helping, kind of those, as women for the most part who are working in the factories, how could the consumer connect back with the person who kind of made their garment or whatever it might be? And so we were trying to figure out how we could actually, either, send them a tip or just kind of, but it was all about blockchain. And so this is why this topic to me is so interesting, because I think it connects us in a different way globally, which is so important to me and to Coresight. And I really think that IBM has been very early in thinking about, kind of bringing, right, this whole kind of, if you will, continuous virtuous circle together.
Right. And I hope that, when you want to help, those type of businesses and companies and ensuring that, these small organizations get rewarded directly from the consumer, if you could take a look at the use case that we did with Farmer Connect, right, which was all around the coffee industry and allowing you to drink a cup of coffee, be able to scan and realize which, of the co-ops or the farmers that it came from in Africa and being able to directly tip those guys. It was life-changing for some of those small farmers. And, we continue to see use cases like that evolving.
That's really unbelievable. And also I think, kind of changes the way that the consumer enjoys the product, right? Because they're also this whole idea around, kind of, natural, organic and whatnot. I mean, if you're actually able to kind of talk to the person who, right, either farmed your product or, kind of created it, that's really creating a completely different level of connection, which I think we all really crave right now.
Right. And trust, right? So you can trust the product that you're consuming because you feel like you have that connection and know where it's coming from directly.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our next topic is like really around trust. I mean, how do you think, this idea around partnerships or rethinking partnerships and, as retailers and brands are trying to balance, supply chain challenges, which, I can't believe we're kind of still in 2022 and talking about so many of these, and then that need to be more sustainable. And I want to actually click on this because I feel that so often there is this idea that sustainability has to cost more. For how we look at sustainability by definition, right? You're utilizing less resources, you're finding new ways to kind of approach how you've, done a process or procedure in the past, thereby kind of utilizing less, wasting less and having a better kind of outcome. And so how do you kind of see this, kind of sustainability and supply chain really, if you will, partnering with each other to change kind of how all these retailers are approaching, the trust aspect and everything else?
Right, so I'll jump in and then I'm going to let kind of Jessica pick up with it as well, because I know she's constantly talking to customers and working through this with them, right? But from our perspective, right, when we look at sustainability with all the different members of the supply chain and ultimately the retailers, right? Tackling sustainability doesn't mean it just has to be around labor laws or around the emissions, right? Tackling it really means, are there new materials that you can use for developing? Are there things that you can do with your refillable packaging? Are there ways to effectively recycle old products and materials? So, depending on where a company is in that journey, it could fall in different realms and spectrums in that. And then also ensuring that they have the visibility and the knowledge of what their suppliers are doing with sustainability, right? It can't be just my silo and I declare that we're a sustainable organization, but to be truly sustainable in your supply chain is to have that visibility and trust among your suppliers as well. And so, Jessica, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, no, I love sort of all of the innovative and optimization ideas that you were tossing out there. I think that that's really what we're seeing in the supply chain space. And I think, to Deborah, what you were saying, sustainability and supply chain is really that perfect marriage. Supply chain is no longer a cost center. The pandemic really gave supply chain a very visible seat at the table, both in front of consumers, but also enterprises and boards. And what's great now is it's now an opportunity for innovation. And so if you can plan projects and investment and spend with sustainability as an intentional design point, then you can, take advantage, Baan, of all of the great initiatives that you were tossing out there of really innovative ways to, again, design for sustainable impact. So when we think about, is it more expensive? What's the business case? Of course, there's always going to be a trade-off in terms of spend and that return. We like to think of it as a quadruple bottom line. We're looking to impact people. We're looking to impact the planet. Profit at the end of the day is always going to be important. And then the fourth is impact across the environmental, social, and governance elements. So if anything, I think it's, again, a source of opportunity, a source of innovation, a source of new business models, at the same time, building that better planet, building better communities.
It's really interesting, this conversation around procurement, because I feel like, procurement maybe used to be even farther away from, the cool kids in supply chain. And now we're really putting them kind of front and center. And, there's so much information, I think, that, needs to kind of get into the hands of the executives to make decisions. How are you kind of seeing executives educate themselves? And, going back to trust, I actually think even trust those in their organization, because so much of this, as you said, Jessica, it's new information, right? It's innovative, and there's a lot to learn in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and I think, again, getting back to data, what we're now able to do is, I loved the conversation around Farmer Connect. We can empower consumers to be a part of making sustainable decisions. And now with the insights from visible data and trusted data, we can also allow supply chain professionals and procurement professionals to be empowered to make smarter decisions when it does come to vendor selection and supplier selection, whether that's across emissions or the social element as well, and ensuring that you are responsibly sourcing, again, your raw ingredients and materials. So I think the great piece of this is, with that trusted, with that data and that element of visibility, we can now arm the procurement professionals to be a part of those decisions. I think the point on education is also very important. And folks haven't necessarily been doing sustainability and making vendor decisions based on emissions for the last few decades. This can be new. So there's certainly as well an educational element of what is the appropriate trade-off that is to be made between maybe cost and emissions. And that's where technology can come in too, in terms of really optimizing and leveraging AI and machine learning, again, to enable professionals to make those right trade-off decisions.
You know, one of the things that I've always thought was very interesting on the trust side is that, you know, we go to the grocery store, we have our groceries delivered at this point in the game, however we get our food, but everybody does get groceries at some point in the day. And, you know, there is this trust element, right, that we have. We assume that, you know, the items that we buy are, first of all, they are what they say they are in the package. And that number two, right, if there is any issue, that there will be a recall. Baan, can you talk a little bit about how specifically in the food side, you've seen kind of blockchain as we're seeing it as an increasing focus from, you know, kind of grocers and everybody else in the kind of food supply chain. And how does that compare to, let's say, non-food?
Right. So when you take a look at kind of the food supply chain, right, we anticipate and are going to be seeing a lot more mandates come out around the, you know, transparency, the recalls, the quickness of the ability to respond to these type of issues. And we've seen that, right, over the past several years. You know, we've got a lot of, you know, the major retailers and a bunch of suppliers on IBM Food Trust, so that when there is a recall, we're no longer looking at the lag time that we used to have before, which was hard to believe, but about 6 months on average, to be able to accurately pinpoint where the, you know, contamination occurred. While now on the system, you can you know, get that information within literally seconds, if not a minute, right, at the most. And, you know, it goes back, again, the data, ensuring that everybody has gathered and is bringing in that data together. Where we continue to see those opportunities is, you know, it extends far beyond food, right? It can go into areas of pharmaceutical, manufactured goods. I'll give you an example, like, you know, when there's a recall on car seats, right? Car seats, if you think about it, is just like putting together, you know, any product. So all the pieces and the components come together. That can also be available on a supply chain with visibility, transparency. So when you have a recall, you don't always have to be going to the consumer sites to figure out if your products have been recalled, or if you sent in the little postcard or signed up for the alerts. But there's a way you can automatically, you know, scan your car seat, see if it's part of, you know, a recall, and then, you know, those are quickly identified and taken off the market. So we can, I mean, that was just an example, but you can, any of the products, it's such a spectrum. And a lot of the solutions and platforms that are available in the market today are built to be able to handle, you know, any of those supply chains, and give them that visibility. It doesn't just have to be around food or clothing, but it can be around, you know, any products out there.
Yeah, it really is unbelievable, just kind of the expansiveness of it all. So, you know, as we look at orchestration, which I think is where it starts to get really interesting, and there is much debate on kind of the actual cost of, you know, kind of being more sustainable. And, you know, you've got obviously several different pieces of this. Where do you see, Jessica, in the organization, where is that owned? And, you know, I love this idea of the vendor's vendor. How does that kind of figure into everything as well?
Yeah, I think that it's really that shared responsibility. So even going back to the education element, it's having that shared responsibility within an organization and within your enterprise. It's not necessarily, sustainability is not just your job if you have sustainability or ESG in your job title. And then I think it's also that importance of partners in partners. So really almost emulating the 17th SDG in terms of that importance of partnership with your vendors. You know, you are more successful across the value chain depending on, you know, that visibility and trust element of all those participants within the supply chain. So I think, you know, when you do think about that optimization and orchestration piece, the more that you think about that integrated network of players, I think there's just so much more kind of value to capture, and you can also help eliminate any, you know, ESG leakage in terms of missing, you know, any risk in terms of whether it's emissions and not appropriately tracking those, or again going back to the social and human element in the supply chain as well.
Thank you. Baan, I'm going to ask you one of the most difficult questions I've gotten in 2022. When I was asked by this fairly large retailer, I was like, I need to ask Baan on the live event today. So here goes. So so in my background, right, as a Wall Street analyst, right, we measured retailers based on, comp store sales, so sales out of existing stores, as well as new stores, right? Because that was growth, and now you have e-commerce in that mix as well, and hopefully a little bit of live streaming too. So that's kind of your top line. If retailers are really looking to sell more at full price, so that, right, that's more sustainable, right? They're not kind of, ordering in, kind of 20% extra with the idea of clearancing it out. But this idea of kind of, bringing in the amount that they plan to sell at close to full price. So there will be less units. Hopefully you do see at least, kind of top line at least stay. And obviously we're in an inflationary environment, so everything has kind of an additional, kind of reflection to it. But this person was asking me, how do they educate the market, right, as they are looking to be a more sustainable organization? And how do analysts then measure them differently or the same against other retailers? And I thought it was, like I said, it was a great question. It was one I thought I would kind of defer to you.
Right. So I think, as we start to see the need for sustainability and visibility become more and more increasing, right? It's about educating the retailer on what the supplier and the consumer on what they are getting, right? I know that we've talked to, had user groups, and we've talked to consumers themselves and asked about, when you take a look at sustainability, is it making your buying decisions, right? And the more that we talk, and it affects different age groups, so let's be clear about that, right? But the more and more we're seeing is that, yes, I'm willing to pay a little more for something that is, kind of around my beliefs, around what I believe is right. It goes with my morals, my ethics. And I think the more that we actually start educating the consumers about what they're getting and why buying sustainable is so important, I think people are going to be willing to pay more, right? Right now, you're right. Our economy is in a state of where we're seeing a lot of inflation. So everybody's paying more for goods that they generally don't believe they should. But ultimately, buying decisions will evolve around the education that is put out by, us as, service providers, by retailers, and the general public, more awareness. And one of the things that I've also noticed within companies is we're starting to see more and more organizations invest in an executive level that focuses just on sustainability, and those are going to be some of the messages that those guys will help drive as well.
It's interesting, Baan, because I think there's an aspect of that is just kind of good business. There was an advisory project we had done where we worked with the chief procurement officer, and what we found, first of all, it was super fun, right? It was like kind of like, basically taking down the blocks and then putting them all back together. And we found all of these pockets, right, where there was either overlapping in spending, especially in global organizations, and we were able to pay for some projects that otherwise we didn't think we were going to be able to get funded. And I do think if everyone can kind of take that step back and think about where this sits in the organization, I think definitely having a kind of chief sustainability officer, and in some cases that's kind of one thing with the chief supply chain officer. But we had actually looked, if you look at the number of retailers in the past 5 years who have kind of put that role in the C-suite, and then their, if you will, the reflection, the mirror almost of their results, I do think that that's actually a great way to start to look at this. And the person who had asked me, without saying too much, their role is fascinating, is chief product officer and also chief sustainability officer. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the, if I could probably talk for an hour on this topic alone, and I promise I won't, but is around returns. And because the consumer, I think in many cases, they don't know, right? Everyone's encouraging them, buy 10, return 9. They don't really know the impact of that, right? They assume, right, that we've done a lot of research around this, right? That the retailer gets it, they repackage it, they put it back out on the shelf. Well, first of all, if if the kind of time for that merchandise to sell on the floor is past, right, it's an immediate markdown, and that's kind of the best case scenario, if you will. And so I think there is this area around education, but I do think this, the chief product officer or chief merchandising officer working very closely with the chief sustainability officer, or having them one and the same if the organization isn't large enough. I think you bring up an incredibly important point, kind of where this needs to reside. And also, I think, Baan, one follow-up, where does the responsibility, if you will, ultimately, is it for the retailer brand? Is it them to tell the story? Or is it for the consumer, right? Where does, theoretically, as we all work together, it's the best solution. Where do you see that right now today? And how do you think that changes in the future?
I think so. Ultimately, the onus is on all of us, right? And so right now, I think it's about getting the messages out and educating the consumers, right? That's where I definitely see it. And it's going to stem from the retailers right now, right? So because they can pull together the information from the suppliers, they can send it out to the consumers, and it's making sure that we have the right messages coming out from that particular, group, and in informing the consumers who have the buying power, right? And one of the things is all the retailers that I'm currently working with in the large organizations is I constantly tell them sustainability is not a light switch. You're not just going to turn it on all of a sudden you're a sustainable company, your products are sustainable. It's a journey, and it's a journey that's going to take time and investment. But you can't just look at it as, oh, this is so expensive and we've got to do it right away and it has to be done immediately. It won't, right? The needs and the change, and there's changes happening on a regular basis, and so it is a journey. And so it's like, you got to map out what is best for your company, your organization, your product. And
so as we kind of wrap up our conversation and move to Q&A, since I see there are quite a few there, I just wanted to, we covered so much ground today, and I think if we start with this idea around kind of visibility, and I think Jessica really helped us think about, it's really like all about the data, and I think that's kind of so increasingly important, because first, organizations need to have that data available, and they have to have it in a way that they can understand it. As we think about trust, and I think Baan kind of gave some great examples around, cotton field to consumer, farm to fork, and we have that trust between the brand, the retailer, and the consumer, and that's, I think, important in this day and age, and we don't have taught that enough. On the orchestration side, this is, going to be, I think, we're on a journey here, right? Marathon, not a sprint kind of thing. And I think that as we look to 23 with the changes in reporting, we're going to see, I'm already seeing, right, kind of firsthand, I'm sure both of you are as well, right, that retailers are starting to ask themselves questions that they never have before. And this idea, I love this idea of the vendor's vendor. And that, I think, is really important. And then the optimization, so much of this conversation was around innovation, right? Kind of getting outside of people's comfort zones. This idea, right? I love the car seat idea, because that's, something that the most of us have had to go through, right? So many of these are recalled, but how do we know if it's like my exact car seat? And so I think this idea that we're also then protecting the consumer and, and their families and, extensions thereof. And so I think that this has been great. So I want to wrap up there. We've got a bunch of questions. So in the time that we have left, Matt, should I jump right in?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So I'll kick this off. Which areas of sustainability are your customers currently focusing on? Carbon generation, authenticity, efficiency, or other metrics?
I can start on this one quickly. I actually think, Deborah, this question gets at what you were just talking about in terms of it's a journey, and you have to kind of initially start with that. Where is your carbon coming from? Where are your emissions coming from? Really starting with understanding today's state, and then figuring out where that efficiency piece can come into as well. So we see that, a lot of times with our retail clients, they might be just starting this journey and really focusing on sort of the where is all of this coming from today, to have that baseline, then starting to think about what that means from a compliance and reporting perspective so that they can check that box. And then quickly helping them move towards the efficiency and the optimization piece to then have improvements and really start to accelerate progress towards the sustainability and ESG goals that they've set. So I'd say that they're kind of focusing on all depending on where they are at in their sustainability journey, and kind of, starting to reach those goals.
Baan, do you want to take that one too?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with you, Jessica, right? And I'm seeing, it's a transition, right? So when we're initially talking with customers, it's all about that carbon footprint, right? Their emissions from point A to point B, right? Because that's just the most obvious, right? And one that can be quickly addressed. Once we've started to address that, a lot of them are turning their focus onto the labor laws as well, right? Ensuring that they're adhering with it, and that their suppliers are as well, and they're delivering products to the marketplace which they can feel good about. So again, it is a journey, but those are the entry points that we're seeing into that journey.
I think that it's interesting because we've got this question from Allie, and it's, how do you see ESG impacting fast fashion business models? I'm going to start with that. So I'm actually going to answer this because this is something that this has actually been a therapeutic webinar, because I've gotten to talk about and hear from both of you so many things that are so, I think, important, and questions that we're getting quite frequently. So on the fast fashion side, there are fast fashion companies, right, who make to order. So it's not that there's kind of a ton of merchandise sitting around waiting for consumers to buy, right? These are companies who have very, I would say, lean and efficient supply chains. And so this idea that it's almost made to order in a kind of fast fashion, if you will, umbrella is, I think, incredibly important, and I think is often missed by many consumers and also other executives. If you look at those companies, I think that would be under the fast fashion umbrella, many of them were very early, and Baan, I'll turn over to you because I know you're working with a lot of these companies. They were very early in talking about, right, sustainability and whatnot. So, maybe we can hear from you in terms of how you think about that industry in particular, and maybe some of the challenges they've had telling their message as well.
Right. I mean, you are right. We're seeing a lot of, less inventory just sitting around or mass producing of products, especially ones that are self-aware, right? We understand that there's dyeing of, particular clothing products, the processes that they go through, and they're in the, a lot of them are reevaluating what are ways that we can do. Can we use recycled water? Does it have to be one pair that goes through the processing at a time? So we're starting to see a lot of self-awareness. It's a matter of ensuring that we articulate those messages to the consumers, as well as ensuring that, companies are going through that transition and evaluating, do I need to have 500, pairs of pants waiting to be shipped out tomorrow, or can the consumer have the patience to allow us to give us a week in order to get it out the door? And I am seeing that more and more. I mean, I'll give you a personal example, right? I ordered a dress. It was it's a linen dress. And I, put it in, and they said, okay, we'll start making your dress. And I was completely fine with that. I actually felt good about it, right? It's a small retailer, and I go, good for them. They're not just having merchandise sit around. And then that also addresses the question you asked earlier about having to discount and move things through the production line. So there are things that we can definitely do to enhance these processes.
Well, and I also think, right, I always think it's great when you can, right, when you can see, quote unquote, your product being made, right? Like, okay, there are these individual steps, right? You as a consumer have a completely different relationship with that retailer and also with your garment, I think than, you would otherwise. Matt, I know we have a few more questions in the queue. Let me hand over to you so that you can assess best what we should ask.
Yeah, I think maybe you just taking the last one would be great. So there's a question from John on to have visibility across the supply chain. All the suppliers have to be connected to. Do you have to get the suppliers on board as well? And how do you handle supply chain blind spots? So it kind of goes back to a little bit of the partnership aspect that I think you touched on earlier, but I think an interesting piece for us to wrap on probably there.
Yeah, absolutely. I can quickly address them, and Baan, I know that this is also in your wheelhouse of product as well. I think that, I almost think of it as social media and the power of numbers. So obviously, the more that you have onboarded, the more that you have engaged, the more visibility and, of course, trust you're going to have across the supply chain. I think in terms of supply chain blind spots, we're seeing that within the four walls of a lot of the retailers that we work with, a lot of times they actually may have access to data that they didn't realize is helping uncover visibility to some of these potential blind spots. And then the other piece of it, it's very much a top-down, bottoms-up in terms of what are some external data sources that are now available as well to also pull in to helping alleviate or mitigate any supply chain blind spots. There's a lot of amazing, even actually one of the IBM sponsored ones was the traffic hub analysis. There's a lot of data sets that you can pull into your existing procurement and supply chain decision-making tools to kind of be armed with those data points to avoid the supply chain blind spots.
Awesome.
And then just to answer the question, in order to have the level of visibility and transparency that is needed, members of the supply chain do all, at least with our solutions, they all need to be a participant. They need to be, join the system, be able to share that data across. The nice thing is that in a lot of these solutions, the data that you put on the platform, you can decide who and what they see. So it doesn't mean joining these solutions allows you to open up all your information, right? But you can pick and choose, which of your upstream or downstream partners you want to share and what information you want to share. But it's all about having that visibility, and being able to pull your entire supply chain requires that you have active participants up and down that supply chain.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you. And thank you to all of you, Deborah, Baan, Jessica. This conversation has been amazing. I would love it to go on, but I know, listeners got places to go. I know you all have places to go, so I appreciate the time that you've been able to spend with us, and I hope that everyone really, was able to take some great takeaways from the conversation. I know I did, and how I'm going to work with some of our biggest retailers here at IBM as well. So appreciate the inside look. I'd encourage everyone who listened to actually connect with our speakers on LinkedIn. Jessica, Baan, Deborah, they're all on LinkedIn. Feel free to go follow them, connect with them. If you've got questions, you can reach out to them there. As well, like I said, keep posted here. We'll be communicating other conversations in this sort of sustainability series with you all in the coming weeks, and we look forward to that. And if you have any other questions around, IBM's kind of position on some of these sustainability items, just go to ibm.com/sustainability, and you'll see a lot of what we talked about. So I recommend you go there, and obviously, go follow Coresight and Deborah as well for her team's insights on some sustainability as well. Great sources of information. So thank you all.
Great, Matt, I'm going to give one more plug for IBM. I think that on the website you have some great case studies, which really do, I think, bring it down to what I do no matter where I'm at. And I think that that's incredibly helpful for retailers as they are kind of grappling with so much of this. So I do think that the website has some, great information on sustainability more generally, but then also I think those case studies are very helpful.
I appreciate that. Yep, it's great stuff there. And for folks whose questions we didn't get to in the Q&A, we will contact you individually and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.